Welcome to this circle. Welcome to this night, which gathers us toward its darkness to face the shadows in our story, the shadows in our history, and the shadows of violence that this day remembers. A night that recalls a particularly dark day, but also recalls an especially courageous way. We gather in gratitude for this good land we call home, the traditional territory in this place of the Papiss-Chase Nation. And we celebrate the language and the culture and the spirituality and the teachings of the Métis and Cree people who have made their lives in this land for generations. As we shape this circle, we deepen our intention to live in the light of respect and reconciliation with one another, and live into the hospitality that our ancestors found in this land and that we hope for every newcomer to this country. We welcome those of you that are joining us online, and we especially welcome SSUC in Saskatoon as you gather with us tonight, meeting in St. Andrew's College. And whether we're in Saskatoon or whether we are in Edmonton, we are Treaty 6 people. And each time we gather, we remind ourselves of the reconciling and healing path we seek with one another. We come together, whoever we are, wherever we come from, whatever our day and our week has held, whatever our gender and our age, our gender identity, our sexual orientation, our language, our ethnicity. We belong in this circle. We have a place, and we take our place here with one another to seek wisdom's light, to find peace in the midst of painful realities, and to strengthen our capacity to continue the revolution of love that we see in Jesus of Nazareth. We come together to sing our hope even when darkness overwhelms us, even when all roads lead to confusion. We sing our hope with one another, and we sing ourselves into hope and possibility.
We meet tonight as the sun is low enough to stream in our windows, and as the daylight recedes through our time together tonight and night falls. It's a night for pondering the courage that we require to find beauty and to live beautifully, even in the midst of tragedy, of darkness, of despair. In our tradition, the story of the sacrifices made to confront abusive power, to confront injustice and threat, give rise to all who must act with great courage. In this darkening hour, in this community we build together, in this safe space, we light a candle. This candle's purpose to burn in the growing darkness, to be at our center, to remind us and to invite us to see the beauty that is yet unseen, to be courageous in ways we could never have imagined. May this light be for us that which connects us, inspires us, and focuses us tonight. In that spirit, we join our voices as we strengthen our intentions, as we commit to opening ourselves in this evening together. In other words, as we pray with one another. It is surprisingly easy to silence opposition, cover up resistance, and use power as a weapon of control. We honor the voices that resist the way of fear, the actions that offer a better way, and the courageousness of love in the face of betrayal and anger. Amid the stark memory of violence which this day remembers, may we be driven deeper into our longing for wholeness, for all that's endangered and wounded in our world. May we live the revolutionary love which Jesus of Nazareth embodied in his life and in his death. May we be inspired to express the beauty of courage in the living of these days. May it be so.
Four different communities from the first century give us stories that we remember and recall in this season. Tonight I want to read just a small piece of the story that Matthew's Gospel gives us, a story of the events leading up to the execution of Jesus, a story set in the night before his death, when he had gathered to share a meal with his friends. And after the meal, they had dispersed into a very familiar garden to take refuge among ancient trees. And this is part of the story as Matthew tells it. Judas came, one of the 12, and with him a great crowd came with swords and clubs. They came from the chief priests and the elders of the people. Now the betrayer had given them a sign, saying, "The one that I kiss, arrest him." And he came up to Jesus at once and said, "Greetings, my teacher." And he kissed him. And Jesus said to him, "Friend, do what you have come to do." And they came and laid hands on Jesus and seized him. And at that moment, one of those that was with him stretched out his hand and drew his sword and struck the servant of the high priest and cut off his ear. Jesus said to him, "Put your sword back in its place. All who choose the sword will perish by the sword." At that hour Jesus said to the crowds, "Have you come out to me as though I were a bandit, with swords and clubs to capture me? Day after day I sat in the temple teaching, and you didn't lay a hand on me. But this is your time. These are words from a first-century community.
A reading by the poet Jane Hirschfield entitled The Weighing. The heart's reasons seen clearly, even the hardest will carry its whip marks and sadness and must be forgiven. As the drought-starved eland forgives the drought-starved lion who finally takes her, enters willingly then the life she cannot refuse, and is lion, is fed, and does not remember the other. So few grains of happiness measured against all the dark, and still the scales balance. The world asks of us only the strength we have, and we give it. Then it asks for more, and we give it. In the story that gets told on this Friday in our tradition, Jesus and his friends eat together. Then they move in the night to a garden where they wait the coming events. Word had spread to them that the religious leaders and the elders of the community had decided to arrest and kill Jesus. So they knew what was to come. Jesus' words had been a bit too inflammatory, his actions too revolutionary, the risk of him whipping the crowds into a frenzied mob too threatening to the power held by the Romans and the temple. Word was that they were coming for him. And so late at night in a quiet garden, amid prayer, amid nervous waiting, fitful sleep, this small group who made their days teaching compassion and love, speaking of equity and justice, had to the powered establishment become dangerous and life-threatening. And it had come to a head in this garden. One of their own brought the authorities to them. This one, Judas, gives Jesus the kiss that marks him. I often think about what that betrayal, as we've deemed it, would feel like. How after 3 years of working side by side, the camaraderie built in walking miles of dusty roads together, of learning from each other, of the teacher-student relationship of spiritual awakening, just how would one process that this friend is now bringing the ones who will arrest him, who wish him dead? And I think perhaps we do have a small sense of what that might feel like. Not because we've necessarily been betrayed to authorities who've come to arrest us, but because we've been victims of betrayals our whole lives. We all have. Not even necessarily at the hands of another, but at the hands of our very own selves. We've each found ourselves acting in ways that betray who we are. We've each had to listen to the echo of words that we've spoken and disbelieved that they've come from our own mouths. We've each done things we regret, realizing that they betray the kind of person we wish to be, or that we think ourselves as being. That feeling of regret and betrayal, we know feels like disappointment, feels like embarrassment, feels like an indignity to ourselves. These are the scars of our living, not of swords or whips or knives, but of memory, of heart wounds, of the slow leaking diminishment of our personhood. All self-inflicted. How do we respond to those betrayals? And I wonder if there's not a hint in this old story. Jesus responds to Judas's kiss with the statement, "Friend, do what you came to do." First of all, he calls him friend. I think our 21st century temperament wants to see that as sarcasm. But I don't think so. Judas was his friend. They'd been on the long road together for a long time. And I don't think that Jesus necessarily says it in the past tense. But friend yet and still. There seems to be acknowledgement there that this relationship forged through time and challenge has led to a certain knowing of each other. Knowing who the other is, that perhaps it was no great surprise. There'd been lots of talks around the dinner table. There'd been lots of conversations about where this was all going, the risk of teaching the way they taught. I wonder if Jesus is recognizing Judas as the one he knows so well, that this action, though perhaps a betrayal to their peace and safety at that very moment, was not a betrayal of Judas himself, that he was being exactly Judas, as Judas was and ever would be. But alas, he also says, do what you came to do. Do what you came to do. There's a sense not just of resignation there. I don't think it's resigning to the fact of what will be, but to say, this is your path, you have to walk it. There's a sense of ultimate forgiveness there. The heart isn't neutral, though, is it? We read these stories, and they are set up, and we are set up to cheer for one and boo the other. Every epic has the good guys and the bad guys. Whatever challenge in front of us, in front of any of us, we're invested in life, our choices, our path. And in those moments when some action moves us from one path to another, we mourn or we cheer, we rage or we lament, we rail or we adapt. It's just the way it is. The poet says, even the hardest hearts will carry its whip marks and sadness and must be forgiven. As that drought-starved eland forgives the drought-starved lion who finally takes her. Are we to blame the predator for being a predator? And they do not remember the other? The hungry must eat. There must be food. We rejoice, we lament, we mourn, we cheer, we rail, we adapt, we respond, we confuse. The poet reminds us of the circle of life, the naturalness of birth and death, the rawness of life's inevitable forces, and yet our response within the great circle is everything. The response is everything. In the face of betrayal, at the hand of another, or our own self-inflictions, we recognize that we really are the walking wounded. We see our scars on our bodies and feel them in our hearts. And in the face of that ongoing push of life, the best choice is to keep going. Do what you come to do. Life is relentless in its march forward. The sun sets and rises again. Robert Frost put it this way, in 3 words I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. But for it to go on with any integrity, with an eye toward ours and others' health, if we really are going to keep going, doesn't it all have to be forgiven? Doesn't the weight on us grow too heavy if we carry around the wounds of each word too quickly expelled? If we carry around each act of hate or impatience we've ever exhibited? If we carry around all the anger or distrust or jealousy or fear we've ever felt? Does that not just get too heavy? So few grains of happiness measured against all the dark. So maybe we have to shed some of the weight. We must molt last season's skin, last winter's fur must shed. On this Holy Friday, we mark the relationship of death and life. We mark the griefs and the betrayals, the sacrifices that have been made for goodness and justice, for the freedom of us and others. But we don't get out of this day unscathed. None of us. Any story worth its salt convicts us and celebrates us. The courage to continue working for all those things requires a relentlessness and a momentum that won't keep moving if we're weighed down with the past's scars and yesterday's mistakes. The world asks of us only the strength we have, and we give it. May this night give us confidence that in the hardest task of all, forgiving ourselves and each other, that we find the courage to continue making life beautiful in our attempts, as we find the courage to speak better words, to be better friends, to act with stronger convictions. In this strength and in this forgiveness, there will be beauty, and the sun will rise.
These are the words of May Sarton in her writing, Santos, New Mexico. Return. Return to the deep sources. Nothing less will teach the stiff hands a new way to serve, to carve into our lives the forms of tenderness, and still that ancient necessary pain preserve. We must go down into the dungeons of the heart, to the dark places where modern mind imprisons all that is not defined and thought apart. We must let out the terrible creative visions. Return to the most human. Nothing less will teach the angry spirit, the bewildered heart, the torn mind, to accept the whole of its duress, and pierced with anguish, at last, act for love. It's so easy to react, and it's so much harder to respond. I recognize the behavior in that unnamed character in the story, the one whose first instinct was to lash out, to strike, to harm, to disable one's opponent. And for whatever reason, the story of the events leading up to the execution of Jesus contained that very believable, very relatable detail about a close supporter, a follower, perhaps even a friend, somehow grabbing his weapon and striking out with violence. And who knows whether his anger is primarily with those who have come to arrest his teacher, or whether his anger is with his own compatriot who led them there, the one who hoped that perhaps the kiss would nudge his leader to finally make his move and fulfill the hopes of so many to revolt against the empire and establish the new kingdom? Or maybe his anger was with himself, having been taken in by all this talk of a new economic order, a new political path. Maybe he was disappointed in himself for having taken up all these prime years in his life to chase a dream. Maybe he was angry at his teacher for having betrayed his trust in him, for having misplaced his trust by putting it in his teacher. He had a good many reasons to be angry, plenty of reasons to be disappointed, and lots of reasons to be afraid. And the story turns it all into another teaching moment. Did you notice there's no criticism of the anger that's expressed? But there's an invitation to refuse to weaponize the anger, to arm it with the same weapons carried by your opponent. There's an invitation to channel the fear and the anger differently, to refuse to take up the sword and the clubs like those who've come for you, to resist those weapons, to find a different tool. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. A different tool might bring a different outcome. Violence is only going to bring more violence. Using the same tactics isn't going to bring a different result. The teacher leads by example, refuses to incite violence, doesn't take this opportunity to utter a threat, calls the informant a friend, corrects the impulse of the one who seeks to defend him by brandishing a weapon, and refuses to lash out, and instead expresses the courage of which the poet spoke, the courage to return to one's deep sources. The deep sources that will teach stiff hands a new way, to return to the most human and act for love. It's tempting to see the reaction of this unnamed follower as an act of bravery. After all, wasn't he the only one that did something to defend his teacher? He put himself out there, according to the story, when others did nothing, when they said nothing. But I wonder if that impulse to strike out, was it courage or was it fear? Was it a reaction or was it an action? We live in a reactive time. A time when it's so much easier to shriek than it is to speak. When it's so much easier to draw verbal swords in social media, in campaign ads, in slogans. It's so much easier than it is to have respectful conversation with each other about the things we fear. It's a time when it's easier to lash out than it is to reach out. It's a time when many of us react and few of us respond. Violence seems efficient. The violence of verbiage and the violence of guns and knives and bombs, but violence doesn't relieve the anger, and it just fuels the rage. In the story, this day remembers, our anger comes under the instruction of a master teacher. one who never schooled his followers out of feeling what they were feeling, but invited us, like the poet, to teach our angry spirit, to teach our bewildered heart, to teach our torn mind to accept the whole of our duress, and pierced with anguish, act for love. It takes courage to find a way to respond rather than a way to react. To find better words, better tools, better paths to a common good, a shared future. And it's a beautiful thing when we find the courage to act for love. It's not expedient. It takes time. It's not efficient. It takes energy. It's not instinctual. It's learned again and again. It's not impulsive. It's restrained and refined. It's not impossible. It's just difficult. So we step into this night, a night not at all unlike the night our story remembers. We come seeking the beauty that we all can find in our courage to act for love.
To live
May we be blessed with the discomfort of easy answers, half-truths, and superficial relationships so that we may live with deep integrity. May we reach for love and let hope arise. May we be blessed with anger at injustice, oppression and exploitation of others, so that we may work for justice, freedom, and peace. May we reach for love and let hope arise. May we be blessed with tears to shed for those who suffer from pain, rejection, starvation, and want, so that we can give comfort and bring joy. May we reach for love and let hope arise. May we be blessed with the courage to forge beauty from betrayal and love to overwhelm our fear. May we reach for love and let hope arise. Let the light of love shine through. Let the light of love shine through. May the best of who I am be the source of what I do. Let the light of love shine through. And I will share a heart of love, and I will do the work of love. This is my vow. Let the light of love shine through. Let the light of love shine through. May the best of who I am be the source of what I do. May the light of love shine through. And I will speak the words of love, and I will live the life of love. This is my vow. Let the light of love shine through. Let the light of love shine through. May the best of who I am be the source of what I do. Let the light of love shine through. Let the light of love shine